During 2020, when everything shut down and our children were suddenly home full time, I found myself completely overwhelmed. I had a 3-year-old and a newborn, one of whom I was just finding out was on the spectrum. And on top of all of that, I was supposed to be managing e learning, but I hadn't signed up to be a teacher. I had no idea what I was doing. I was trying to juggle everything, being a teacher, being a mom, being a disciplinarian, and even the entertainment center all at once. And I just hit a breaking point. I called my uncle, a retired teacher, and I asked him, what am I doing? And that's when he introduced me to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In his words, he told me, forget about all that. You're a mother, so just be that. Your job is to love your kids, to take care of them, to show them comfort. They'll go back to school, they'll learn, but they need love first. Then he said something that stuck with me. If a child does not feel loved, they cannot focus on anything else. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a psychological framework that outlines what every human, especially a child, requires for healthy development. At the very foundation are physiological needs, right? Basic survival essentials like food, water, shelter, sleep, and warmth. No child can thrive without these being met. The next level is safety, which includes a stable home environment, protection from harm, and the sense of security that comes from routine and stability. And when children live in unpredictable and dangerous environments, their ability to develop emotionally and cognitively is deeply affected. Then comes love and belonging, where children need to feel nurtured, valued, and emotionally connected to their caregivers. They need consistent affection, family bonding, and social relationships to build emotional security. Without this, they may struggle with trust and forming healthy connections later in life. And moving up, we have esteem needs, which focuses on self-worth, encouragement, and positive reinforcement. Kids need to feel capable. They need to feel supported and acknowledged for their achievements to develop confidence. And at the top is self-actualization, where a child can explore their potential, creativity, and independence. But here's the key. If the lower levels aren't met, a child can't progress to higher levels of development. I asked my community, what is the definition of a good mother? This is what my community had to say. I think a good mom respects her kids as much as she expects to be respected back, and also sees the kids, or young adults as in my case now, as who they truly are and not who she wants them to be. A good mom makes mistakes without any intention of harming her children. They feel bad about themselves when that happens. A good mother prioritizes the future of her kind above herself. A mother is the most dangerous bear, the most dangerous lion, the most dangerous human, because she will forfeit it all to preserve her kind. And yet she is the most loving bear, the most loving lion, and the most loving human to her own. And as we all have different ideas of what good parents should be and how good parenting should go, by no means is any parent ever expected to be perfect. However, they are expected to learn from their mistakes and strive to raise children who feel loved, secure, and empowered in this world. Welcome to That's My Opinion, where we break down the biggest stories to uncover hidden truths and explore why they matter. I'm Bacon Bears, and today we're diving into everything Ruby Franke, a once popular family influencer who now sits behind bars. We'll be examining her parenting style, the legal case against her, and how her influencer status contributed to her downfall. But beyond that, we'll also explore the dangers of unregulated family vlogging and the exploitation of children on social media. Because when the pursuit of internet fame takes priority over a child's well-being, the consequences can be devastating. Let's get started. In the Mormon faith, two core principles stand out: the pursuit of perfection and the mission to spread their beliefs to the world. And in Utah, many find a way to accomplish both, striving to be the perfect parent and family while spreading their faith through the lens of family vlogging. And before we move on, I want to be transparent. I was born and raised Catholic, and my family still follows that faith. Over time, my own beliefs have changed, but I deeply respect whatever people choose to believe as long as their faith respects others in return. What you believe should never bring harm to another person in any way. In the Mormon faith, one of the most important roles a person can have is that of a parent. In 2015, Ruby and Kevin Franke decide to share their lives and their 6 children with the world through YouTube vlogging. The goal of the channel was to be a ray of sunshine, and the couple would post somewhere around 5 days a week, which I'm struggling to get out 1 day a week. And the YouTube channel that they branded as 8 Passengers would gain more than 2 million subscribers and amass something around 1 billion. Yes, with a B. 1 billion views. The Frankie parents followed the classic family vlogging formula. It was wholesome, day-in-life content, and the channel quickly gained traction as Ruby documented absolutely everything, from morning routines to holiday celebrations, school activities, and parenting lessons. At the time, family vlogging was booming. And Ruby, a former stay-at-home mom with a background in parenting and education, positioned herself in an authoritative yet down-to-earth figure, often sharing parenting advice alongside their daily experiences. The early 8 Passengers videos were lighthearted. They focused on playful sibling dynamics, family outings, and structured home life. And fans really appreciated Ruby's emphasis on discipline, structure, and values. And the channel steadily grew. However, even in these early years, some viewers expressed concern about Ruby's strict parenting style, though at the time, these were largely dismissed as personal parenting choices. Kevin Franke describes his mom in the early years of vlogging as the best mom. Fun, loving, devoted. To them, they were just a normal family, going to church and spending time together. And in the beginning, the vlogging was just like a really early on-camera journal. Nothing was set up. There just happened to be a camera around while they were living their lives. But Kevin Franke, Ruby's husband, well, ex-husband now, has admitted that in the beginning he was very uncomfortable with vlogging. Yet even though Ruby had a camera on them 24/7, he never spoke up about it. As someone who is perpetually online while my husband wants nothing to do with that, I know firsthand that you can still live your dream while respecting the feelings of others. Honestly, it's not hard at all. Not everyone wants a camera in their face. Even my own kids at just 5 and 8 sometimes tell me no when I ask for a picture or a video, and I get it. In the documentary, The Devil in the Family, The Fall of Ruby Franke, which I have some issues with this name, because this is not just the fall of Ruby Franke, because Kevin, you were a part of this too. So my qualms start at the title. But Kevin talks a lot about how he was just a nerd and how he was insecure and how Ruby was his everything. And I have to say, it doesn't take long before he starts distancing himself from everything, as if this was just all Ruby's doing. However, Kevin, you were actively filming. You were in the videos. And while you talk about feeling guilty and seem to show some awareness in the documentary, it really comes across as, yeah, I was a part of it, but this was just like all Ruby. And that's where my biggest issue lies, because you can love somebody and be completely devoted to your partner, but that does not mean that you stop being an advocate for your children when they need you. You had that choice and you chose not to. However, you still continued chasing the paycheck at the expense of your own children. It wasn't long before their oldest son, but second oldest child, Chad, became the star of the show. With a demographic mostly made up of young females, Chad's humor, charm, and playful personality made him the perfect centerpiece for their content. However, things took a real turn when Chad, a 16-year-old boy at the time, revealed that his bedroom had been taken away as a punishment. While Ruby laughed it off as a joke, it was revealed Chad had been forced to sleep on a beanbag for 7 months as part of the disciplinary measure.
I had my phone for like a day.
My bedroom was taken away for 7 months and then you give it back like a couple weeks ago.
I don't think our viewers know that. You've been sleeping on a beanbag.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October. And they gave my room back like 2 weeks ago.
What behavior results in a necessity getting taken away from you in the Franke house? Well, Chad woke up one of his siblings in a hurry and told him to pack his bag because they were going on a surprise trip to Disney. Now, was the younger sibling upset? Of course. And yes, it was a mean prank. However, 7 months with no bedroom or bed. You let me know in the comments if I'm being unreasonable. I grew up with an uncle who was basically like my brother to me since we were only 3 years apart. And I wish he would have ever woken me up in the middle of the night and told me that I was going to Disney because, girl, the stories that I have. But at the end of the day, like, it's all just typical sibling stuff. Now, we know that sleep is essential for teenagers, impacting their physical health, brain development, and emotional well-being. It helps with memory retention, critical thinking, and decision-making, all of which are crucial for academic success. Without enough sleep, teens struggle with focus, impulsivity, and emotional regulation, leading to mood swings and poor judgment. Experts recommend 8 to 10 hours of sleep for teens, and denying a teen proper rest by removing their sleep can have lasting consequences. Sleep is not a privilege, it's a necessity. But I digress. Another thing that commenters were not happy about was the fact that Chad was also sent away to a camp, but not just any camp, Anasazi Wilderness Camp. And what is that, you ask? Well, I would love to tell you. Anasazi Wilderness Camp is an outdoor behavioral health program for adolescents aged 12 to 17 facing challenges such as defiance, family conflict, and a lack of motivation. He spent approximately 8 to 10 weeks living in the Arizona wilderness. The Anasazi Foundation emphasizes principles like unconditional love, agency, repentance, forgiveness, and restitution, aiming to help participants develop essential life skills in a wilderness setting. However, some former participants describe the experience as mentally and emotionally distressing, and wilderness therapy programs in general have been criticized for the lack of regulation, and some have been accused of mistreatment. But at your peak, with millions of followers and $100,000 a month in the bank, what's a little trauma off the back of your son? This clip was the catalyst that had everyone looking deeper into 8 Passengers. Now, for me, this was not my introduction to the family. This was.
I just got a text message from Eve's teacher, and she said that Eve did not pack a lunch today, and can I bring a lunch over to the school? This happens quite often when you're raising children. Because I know that her teacher is uncomfortable with her being hungry and not having a lunch. And it would ease her discomfort if I came to the school with a lunch. But I responded and just said, Eve is responsible for making her lunches in the morning, and she actually told me she did pack a lunch. So the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry. And hopefully nobody gives her food and nobody steps in and gives her a lunch.
Ruby's young daughter had forgotten to bring her lunch to school. Her teacher was uncomfortable with her daughter not having a lunch. And lunch is essential for 6-year-olds, fueling their growth, energy, and focus in school. Proper nutrition supports brain development, concentration, and mood stability, helping them stay engaged in learning. Anyone should be uncomfortable with not giving a hungry child food. And as a stay-at-home mom myself, I believe that the most important job is making sure that my children have what they need, whether they're inside or outside of my home. Now, should children have age-appropriate chores? Absolutely. Do I think a 5 or 6-year-old is capable of packing their own lunch, depending on the child? Absolutely. However, is there a little thing that helps make sure children complete their tasks? Yeah. It's called follow-through. Follow-through as a mother helps teach children responsibility, accountability, and consistency. And when parents set expectations and ensure tasks are completed, children learn that their actions have consequences, reinforcing discipline and structure. Do children need a lunch? Non-negotiable, yes. Should a child be taught responsibility? Non-negotiable, yes. Should food ever be used as a punishment? Non-negotiable, never. And this moment opened the world's eyes to a disgusting pattern. The Franke parents were willing to use essential needs as punishment. Sleep, food, and even love became conditional in their household. Oh, and let's not forget this absolute banger, because both Ruby and Kevin Franke, before ever teaming up with a woman named Jodie Hildebrandt, which we'll get to later, put a pin in that, actively and infamously withheld Christmas gifts from their 2 youngest children. Ruby justified it as a form of discipline, claiming that they had misbehaved and didn't deserve presents. She framed it as a lesson in accountability, but in reality, it was just cruel and excessive. Just picture it. 2 of the youngest siblings sitting there, empty-handed, while the other 4 children are showered with gifts and attention. Denying young children the joy of Christmas not only created immediate emotional distress, but likely instilled deep-seated feelings of shame, rejection, and unworthiness. And those emotions don't just disappear. And imagine, as parents, convincing your child that Santa exists, but not that they are worthy of love and respect. On the outside, the Frankies appeared to be living the dream, traveling, taking family vacations, and doing all the things that looked amazing to the average follower. They attended meetups, signed autographs, and embraced the influencer lifestyle that so many people imagine, one filled with adventures, admiration, and picture-perfect moments. And all of this, the vacations, the lifestyle, the influencer status, was all funded by the Franke children. They were the stars of the show. Yet in the documentary, Kevin claimed that they were being blessed because they were sharing their faith with the world. But at no point did he seem to ask himself the real question. Were you truly being blessed, or were you just profiting off of the backs of your children? How do you not ask that question when they are complaining about filming? How are you not asking that question when your wife is putting out videos about bra shopping and puberty and periods? Oh, that's right. You don't ask because $100,000 a month. Got it. The behind the scenes footage of Ruby with her children while Kevin is filming, mind you, is absolutely revolting. Both of these parents expected their kids to work and growing frustrated when they don't want to do this or just aren't cooperating. And this isn't just the typical kind of resistance that kids show. It's a child visibly uncomfortable, maybe just restless, or maybe because they simply don't want a camera shoved in their face. And instead of respecting that, they treat it like defiance. There's a scene where one of the kids is climbing on the table, not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And instead of handling it calmly, Ruby forcefully puts her hand over the child's mouth and removes her from the table, all while Kevin is filming. And what does he do? He playfully says, "Cut." And Ruby, without missing a beat, tells him, you know what, just edit that part out. Why? Why not let people see the small, real moment of parenting? Is it because you knew it was wrong? And instead of, I don't know, not doing that, they just keep doing it. That's why this infuriates me. They are fully aware that their behavior has crossed lines, but rather than stopping, they chose to hide it. Not just Ruby, but also Kevin. And this was all prior to Jodie Hildebrandt. Now, my husband and I, we're a team. We are by no means perfect parents, by no means a perfect couple, but we have checks and balances. And sometimes you get frustrated. Sometimes you lose your patience because we're human. But in our house, if one of us starts to get out of pocket, the other one stops in. We're like, hey, and we sort of try to play referee. And you say, hey, take a break. And you go over there. And you go over there and you split them up, and then the other parent takes over, because that's what parenting should be, right? Having accountability, stepping in when things get heated. But Kevin never did that. He never checked Ruby. He never stepped in. He added to it. And why? Because you found Ruby's behavior acceptable with your kids? Because I have questions. In the documentary, Kevin Franke says, I had no idea what was happening. And Kevin, as I'm trying to hear you out in this documentary right now, be so fucking for real. Be so for real. You were holding the camera, sir. Enter Jodie Hildebrandt, a so-called therapist who would take Ruby Franke's already extreme parenting beliefs and push them to a whole new level. Known for her rigid authoritarian approach to mental toughness, Jodie preached a philosophy that prioritized control, obedience, and emotional deprivation as a means to achieve purity and righteousness. This is also a woman who is divorced with 2 children who won't speak to her. So do with that information what you will. However, Jodie Hildebrandt is a former counselor and life coach. She founded Connections, a counseling organization based in Utah, offering programs aimed at helping individuals and families improve their relationships. However, her methods have been controversial, leading to legal issues, including a probation of her counseling license in 2012 for unprofessional conduct. Let's just take a small gander at some of the reviews that have been left about her counseling, shall we? She is not a good person. Do not go to her. Of all the people I've met, she is the most like a wolf in sheep's clothing. She is not a moral or respectable person. Do not trust her in any circumstance. Then there's, my wife went to her counseling and classes, and the main result was that Miss Hildebrandt brainwashed my wife that I had an addiction when I did not. My wife was so certain that I was hiding something as a result of this woman's lies that we had to go to an honest counselor to help dispel this dishonesty that this woman had told my wife. Do not go to this woman. And my personal favorite, her license was on probation in 2012 for illegally sharing client information. Go to someone whose license has not been on probation. But Ruby, she gladly overlooks all of this, even when her own daughter, Sherry, tries to warn her. And instead of listening, she doubles down, not only allowing Jodie to counsel her children, but eventually letting this woman move into their home. Yeah, don't worry. We'll get there. However, good for Sherry for taking the initiative to do her research to protect her family, even when, I don't know, it's not her job. Anyways, the snake oil salesman that is Jodie Hildebrandt would be introduced to Ruby Franke by a friend of Ruby's who was attending this Connections, a place where you follow a leader and her belief system with extreme devotion, often isolating people from outside influences like men because yuck, am I right? You can never have thoughts of your own or question the leader because she was the only way to get to truth. And the match made in hell would come together because Chad was getting in trouble to the point that he would be expelled from school. And according to Ruby, which this was said in front of Kevin, love is obedience. And if they weren't obedient, well, they would get what they deserved. And that was a good old-fashioned beating. Chad recalls being hit, whipped, and beaten so hard that Sherry claims she helped him with his bloody nose, and one time even had to wash blood from the walls of their home. Now, what I don't understand about behavior like this is if it's not acceptable to hit your partner, why is it acceptable to hit your children? I can't just walk up to somebody in a grocery store when I'm having a bad day and punch them in the face without consequences. So as an adult, when it comes to other adults, you understand restraint, but with your kids, you don't. But on the other side of things, as the oldest daughter, Sherry is becoming subject to something called parentification, which is a dynamic where a child is forced to take on responsibilities beyond their years, often stepping into a parental role for their siblings. And instead of simply being a teenager, Sherry was expected to manage and care for her younger siblings in ways that should have been her parents' responsibility. And this not only placed an unfair emotional burden on her, but also forced her to grow up too quickly, all while navigating a household that was becoming increasingly rigid and controlled. Jodie began counseling Chad twice a week, but when his behavior didn't change quickly enough, Ruby escalated things. She told him, quote, "Jodie and I have found a military camp to send you unless you can get it together," unquote. And again, where is Kevin in all of this? My husband and I don't make major decisions for our children without both of us being involved. That's just basic parenting, or should be. But Kevin, he's nowhere to be seen, letting Ruby and Jodie dictate the course of their son's life without question. And because everything in their home was content, Ruby made Chad talk about his therapy on video, putting his personal struggles on display for their audience, for views. But in Ruby's eyes, it was working, not because Chad was healing or learning, but because he was so terrified of being sent away that he became compliant. And to Ruby, that was a real goal. With Chad now being compliant, Kevin and Ruby rekindling their strained marriage, and Jodie securing a well-known couple to be the face of Connections, it seemed like everybody was winning. And Jodie Hildebrandt and Ruby Franke would start Moms of Truth. Moms of Truth was a social media platform run by Ruby Franke and Jodie Hildebrandt where they promoted their extreme parenting beliefs under the guise of teaching truth and accountability. The group, which primarily operated on Facebook and YouTube, pushed harsh, rigid views on parenting, often emphasizing obedience, discipline, and emotional deprivation as a means to fix children. And the 8 Passengers community was not happy with this change. They were really upset about it, and especially about with the way that Ruby was treating her children and speaking about parenting, because it was such a stark contrast to what they originally came to the channel for. Now, children weren't the only thing on the chopping block for Jodie Hildebrandt. No. She had a particular hatred for the men, and because men are lustful and they were all addicted to porn. So of course she had to figure out how to get Kevin Franke out of the picture so her and Ruby could be leaders. In this documentary, Kevin shares how he became convinced that the world was ending, a belief solidified by the events of 2020. The chaos of the pandemic and the social unrest only deepened his apocalyptic mindset, fueling the extreme control and survivalist ideology that shaped their household. The Mormon faith believes that the world is in what's called the latter days, leading up to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Before this happens, there will be wars, natural disasters, and moral decline, but also a spread of the gospel and the gathering of believers. When Christ returns, he will bring peace and rule during a 1,000-year period called the millennium. After this, a final judgment will take place where everyone will be judged based on their actions and the world will be transformed into a place of eternal peace, and good people who follow God's teachings will be rewarded. However, Jodie would start calling Ruby and telling her that there were hooded figures around her bed and that Satan was coming to get her, which honestly, Jodie, I'm not sure you'd even be welcomed in hell. But Kevin Franke talks about how they started to believe that Jodie was being called to by God and he was speaking through Jodie, and they were a part of it, so they needed to go and save her. So they drove to her 4-bedroom, 3.5 bathroom, 9,000 square foot luxury home, which sits on 1.4 acres of land with amenities such as a pool, a spa, a fire pit, and a 5-car garage, all paid with the blood money of splitting up families. It's interesting to me that she made so much money off of marital advice, all while not being able to save her own marriage, and she's not speaking to her kids. Now, Jodie, did you try to implement your own steps inside your own marriage? Did you try to get your children to seek truth? Let me guess, they're all living in distortion? Kevin eventually admits to police that while he was there, unexplainable things happened inside of this home, from loud noises in the basement to long-fingered handprints high on a glass door. And I have to tell you, to me, this is one of 3 things. Number 1, Jodie is doing these things because she has to sell the package, right? Number 2, someone else is being kept unwillingly in the house because we know that's one of Jodie Hildebrandt's favorite pastimes. Or number 3, she is claiming to be speaking to God and Satan is trying to get her. And I'm a believer. And girl, you better be careful who you ask for, because sometimes it answers. But Ruby would decide that Jodie could not stay in her own home. So naturally, it would be fitting that a demon-possessed counselor would come and stay in the Franke home with Ruby, Kevin, and their 6 children. And Sherry would be the one who would have to give up her bedroom so that Jodie would have a nice bed to sleep on, because as history shows, the Franke children don't need beds, according to Ruby. And also because everything is content, Sherry moving all of her stuff out of her bedroom, of course there would be a camera shoved in her face while this is happening. And with Jodie Hildebrandt in the house, there was a new focus, which was the 2 youngest Franke children, who we will refer to as R and E for the remainder of this episode. But at this point, R, who is her youngest son, and E, who is her youngest daughter, are doing regular kid things. They're talking back, they're pushing their boundaries, they just want to see what they could get away with. But Chad Franke would speak about how Ruby was essentially taking this as a personal attack. And your job as a parent is to redirect behavior, to guide your children, give them opportunities to get it right. And at the very least, I don't know, speak to them with some respect, because that's how you model how it's done. And to be clear, doing this doesn't mean that your child will still not push boundaries, because they absolutely will. But you have no leg to stand on when demanding respect and obedience if you're not showing them respect and love in return. And all while singling out the 2 youngest children, Jodie Hildebrandt has now brought her demons into the Franke home and is now getting possessed there. And Kevin and Ruby have to exorcise these demons. However, at some point they would kick out Kevin and it would just be Ruby and Jodie all night long with massage oils and candles. Girl, they'd be exercising something. But aside from kicking Kevin out of the bedroom, it wouldn't take long before Jodie and Ruby would kick him out of the entire family. Jodie would start to pick at Kevin, not only in front of Ruby, but also in these men-only counseling sessions that he would attend. You see, when Kevin first came to these sessions, Jodie would build him up in an effort to draw him in. But now that she didn't need him anymore, she would actively berate Kevin in these meetings and in front of these other men. And I have to tell you, it'll be a cold day in hell where someone constantly puts me down privately and publicly and lives in my home rent-free, or pays rent for that matter. Jodie would be packing up her demons real quick. And so Kevin blames a lot of things on Jodie, saying Jodie started putting her fingers in every aspect of our lives. Bet. At the same time that all of this is happening, Chad would confide in Ruby and Jodie because he thought that that was the right thing to do. That's what both Jodie and Ruby preached about, truth, which is what Chad was giving them. But they didn't like what they were hearing. Chad, a 17-year-old boy, had told them that he was kissing girls and had watched explicit material, which in my opinion is a normal 17-year-old thing to do. They're exploring themselves and figuring out things, and they have feelings and they want to kiss people. But Ruby would essentially tell Chad that that's why the demons are attacking Jodie. I can't imagine the therapy that these kids have to go through to undo all of this trauma. So Chad and Kevin would simultaneously get kicked out, and neither of them were allowed to contact any other family member, including each other. And Kevin says his goodbyes to his children, and everyone is crying. And what is Ruby doing? Because remember, friends, everything is content. She's taking pictures. Her kids are crying. Her husband is crying. And her first thought is, that's right, get the camera. Now tell me, if you're a parent and your significant other says get out and you can absolutely not contact your children, would you? More importantly, could you? The isolation, however, wasn't limited to the males. Sherry was a victim of it as well. Ruby blamed any damage that was going on in the family on Sherry and said, I can see you don't want to be a part of this family anymore, and tells her she's no longer welcome. See you later, I guess. So needing comfort, a parental figure, anything, Sherry messages Kevin, her dad, I love you and I miss you, and very lovingly, as any parent would. He blocks her. With Chad, Kevin, and Sherry all out of the house, any buffer that once existed was now gone. A buffer is someone, maybe often an older sibling or another family member, who willingly steps in to de-escalate conflicts. They intervene in abusive situations or even just serve as a witness, which can sometimes deter the worst of the abuse. And without them, Ruby and Jodie had absolute unchecked reign over the remaining 4 children. And there's no one left to interrupt this cycle, no one to provide even a small layer of protection. The power dynamic had completely shifted, leaving the younger children more vulnerable than they'd ever been before. Kevin Lee Open admits that going into the separation, his biggest concern was losing his marriage and Ruby. And even in this documentary, he never says that he was afraid of losing his relationship with his kids, or even possibly never seeing them again. And let's not forget, Kevin Franke, personally cut Sherry off. This wasn't just Ruby's doing. And that's what leaves me so on edge with this documentary. Because sometimes, Kevin, if you're compliant, you are complicit, period. When the interviewer asked Kevin, why didn't you step up and stop it? His response was, I know, but if I dwell on that question, it eats me up. As it should. But more importantly, you should dwell on it. You should go back, unpack everything that you did and everything you failed to do, so you can truly understand the harm that was caused. That's the only way to learn. Take accountability and make sure you never repeat the same mistakes. At some point, Jodie and Ruby started spending more time at Jodie's house, making videos and preparing for what they believed was an imminent apocalypse. They were stockpiling food, water, and medical supplies in a bunker inside of Jodie's home. But with Kevin, Sherry, and Chad gone, who was taking care of Ruby's younger children back in Springville, Utah? Oh, that's right. It was Ruby's 15-year-old daughter who was left in charge for days. Responsible for 3 younger siblings, aged 13, 11, and 9. And before anyone jumps into my comments, well, I was home alone as a kid. So was I. And just because something happened in the past and you survived does not mean that we shouldn't learn from these things and make better choices moving forward. And with now Sherry out of the house, the burden of parentification shifts to the 15-year-old. She was expected to cook, clean, maintain a home, and care for her younger siblings, all responsibilities that no teenager should have to bear. But despite everything, Sherry Franke, at just 19 years old, showed more emotional maturity than both of her parents. She had been exiled from her own home, yet she still had the compassion and awareness to call the police for a welfare check on her siblings. And that's more than I can say for Kevin Franke, their actual father, actual caregiver, and the actual adult who should have stepped in long before it got to this point. The police arrived to conduct a welfare check, and as they do, the neighbors come out to speak with them, offering what they had seen as witnesses. But when the officers knocked on the Frankie door, no one answered. And honestly, it's not surprising to me. The kids were probably scared and hiding, and I can only guess that Ruby had most certainly instructed them, under no circumstances do you open the door or speak to anyone. And some of the men in the neighborhood even went as far as contacting Kevin, directly telling him, hey, the police are at your house and Ruby isn't there. It's just your children. And what did Kevin do? He blocks them. And this is where I cannot give Kevin any more benefit of the doubt. Because if someone told me that the police were at my home, my kids are inside alone, there is no adult present, I would fly to my house. No hesitation. And instead, he blocks them. And in this documentary, we get this slow, zoom in, dark, moody shot of Kevin trying to build emotional impact. Kevin, be so fucking for real right now. So for real. He talks about being brainwashed, but this behavior was also exhibited from before Jodie even showed up. His number one concern was Ruby Franke. But unfortunately, because there was no actual physical evidence, CPS had to close the case and nothing came from the phone call. On August 30th of 2023, the world would finally see the horrifying reality that had been happening behind closed doors. Ruby Franke's son escaped from Jodie Hildebrandt's home. He was captured on a Ring camera, emaciated, bound with duct tape, and covered in wounds so severe that they left a grown man who called 911 in tears. He was nothing but skin and bones. His injuries were so deep that the officers could see his tendons. And instead of proper medical treatment, his gashes had been covered with honey and cayenne pepper, wrapped in saran wrap, and then sealed with duct tape. This wasn't just abuse. It was torture. To put myself in the shoes of Kevin Franke and not only see this Ring doorbell footage, but to see the pictures of this child, you would need police standing in between myself and my husband. And if you think for 1 second I would go to the jail and make a phone call to my husband or put money on his books after he was able to do something like that to my babies, not an ice cream cone's chance in hell, I promise you. The absolute hatred that would course through my body for my husband if he did this to one of my children. I would be foaming at the mouth. And Kevin Franke can sit in this documentary and still talk about how he has love for Ruby Franke. But I digress. The police would force their way into Jodie Hildebrandt's luxury torture palace under exigent circumstances. This is a legal principle that allows law enforcement to enter a property without a warrant when there is an immediate threat to life or safety. Given the 911 caller's report of a malnourished, injured child escaping from the home and the possibility that other children were in danger inside, officers had legal grounds to act quickly without waiting for a judge to issue a warrant. Inside the house, the police found a scene of pure horror. Rope, handcuffs, honey, cayenne pepper, and a 10-year-old girl with a shaved head who was so emaciated that at first they mistook her for a little boy. She was in such critical condition that she needed immediate medical attention. She refused to speak to police, and honestly, I can't even begin to imagine how she must have felt. She had been conditioned to believe that hospitals would try to kill her, that the police were dangerous, and then suddenly officers storm in shouting and clearing rooms trying to secure the scene because they had no idea what they were walking into. And on top of the unimaginable trauma she had already endured, now there was an entirely new layer of terror added to it. At this point, Ruby, I believe, is in Springville, and she would call Kevin for the first time in a year. And she would tell him that the kids were possessed, and he needed to go pick his kids up from the police station, and that this was his chance to redeem himself. And my question to you, Kevin, is you've had a year, no wife, no children, essentially no responsibilities, and you've done zero soul searching, just zero improvement In the meantime, as Kevin is on his way to save the day and his children from the evil that has possessed them, Ruby is on her way back to Jodie Hildebrandt's house, where she would pull up to a house surrounded by police officers, and she would say absolutely nothing. Just nothing. I don't know why I'm surprised. But she wouldn't even inquire about her own children. Where are they? Are they okay? Who has them? If you go online, you can find Kevin Franke's interview with the Ivins Police Department. And let me tell you, watching it is wild. Watching it, you can see Kevin in real time beginning to piece things together and realizing just how deep this all went. And while he may not have known the full extent of what was happening, he also willingly left his children for an entire year. And at best, that's negligence. You don't just pack up and decide you're not going to see your kids anymore, or at least you shouldn't, in my opinion, be able to. But even at this moment, as the truth is staring him in the face, he still protects Ruby instead of any one of their 6 children. When asked who called him to come down to the police station, he said, "I'd rather not say." It was Ruby. When asked if he agreed with the punishments Ruby inflicted, again, "I'd rather not say." And I think the most shocking part of it is that there's no anger for Ruby, no outrage towards Ruby Franke. It's just kind of like this weird deflection and avoidance. In another interrogation room, you have Jodie Hildebrandt, who thinks that she can just still sell snake oil to the police. I'm a therapist. I'm on your side. I know what you're thinking. And she's just still being a real nightmare of a person. Our Frankie, Ruby and Kevin's son, would tell the police everything about what happened in that house. The brutal punishments, standing in the desert for hours, being tied to weights, walking barefoot in the scorching heat, having food withheld as a form of discipline. Investigators would later return to the home to gather more evidence, and they would uncover one of the most disturbing pieces yet. And that was Ruby Franke's personal journal entries. Ruby's journal detailed horrific acts of child abuse, often framed through religious justifications. In one entry, she described shaving her son's head, forcing his head into a toilet, and inflicting pain until he was bleeding and screaming. Another entry revealed her belief that her son was, quote, emulating a snake and needed to be 100% obedient to reflect the Savior, claiming that she held the power of God over him. In another chilling passage, she wrote about pushing her son into the sun, poking him with a cactus, and even warning his so-called demon friend that she would fight him until the day he died. Which is interesting, because the only demon friend we can see is Jodie Hildebrandt. Ruby Franke and Jodie Hildebrandt were each charged with 6 felony counts of aggravated child abuse on December 18th of 2023. Ruby pleaded guilty to these 4 counts, admitting to forcing her son to work outside without protection, resulting in severe sunburns, and claiming that her children were possessed to justify her extreme punishments. During her sentencing hearing, Ruby Franke expressed remorse and gave a tearful apology to her children, acknowledging the harm that she had caused and accepting responsibility for her role in the abuse. However, in jailhouse phone calls before her sentencing, she referred to her arrest as miraculous intervention, suggesting it separated her from negative influences and gave her an opportunity for personal change. She also expressed feelings of being misunderstood and misinterpreted by her family and others. Her statements reflect a mix of remorse, self-reflection, and justification, as she appears to struggle with fully accepting the reality of what she did. During her sentencing hearing, Jodie Hildebrandt expressed remorse and took full responsibility for her actions, stating, "I take full accountability for my choices, and it is my preference that I serve a prison sentence." Her statement conveyed regret and willingness to accept the consequences, though many question whether her remorse is truly genuine. I believe Ruby Franke is an extremely abusive person and manipulative person, in my opinion. And I think that finding Jodie only amplified those tendencies. It was as if Jodie lit the fire of religious psychosis, giving Ruby justification to continue the control and torture she had already inflicted for years, withholding beds, food, and water. But this time, with Jodie replacing Kevin, Chad, and Sherry as her enabler. Instead of someone stepping in to de-escalate the situation, Ruby now had someone gassing her up and reinforcing her actions. Ruby talks about brainwashing, but I have a hard time fully crediting that as a sole reason for her actions because the moment sentencing came around, she snapped right out of it. True deprogramming from brainwashing takes years. And yet, when it came to facing consequences, she seemed to regain clarity almost instantly. Another disturbing thing that Ruby claimed, and this one is so gross, one I haven't even touched on yet, is that her 12-year-old son, the child who bravely escaped Jodie Hildebrandt's home, was a problem child from an early age. She alleged that at just 3 years old, he was not only looking at explicit content, but also abusing his siblings and even neighbors. So let me get this straight. At 3 years old, this child somehow had unrestricted access to the internet to view inappropriate material, which Ruby, as his mother, had nothing to do with. No parental oversight? No monitoring of what he was watching? And let us not forget, when exactly did he have the time for this, considering he had a camera shoved in his face 24/7? But the most horrifying part, because of these unproven accusations, Ruby ensured that her son would be completely isolated, placed in a home with no other children, including his own siblings. And even from behind bars, she continued to push for his isolation. Frankie has made it clear that she will never speak to her mother again. And Kevin himself has stated that he has no plans to reconcile with his estranged wife. In a recent interview, he even revealed that he had to ask Ruby to stop writing to him from prison, saying, "I don't want to hear anymore." Yet in the same breath, he admits, "I truly did and still do love her." And if I could say one thing to Kevin Franke, I would honestly ask, how do you think it would make you feel if I looked at you in the eyes and said, I still have love for someone who abused and tortured you? To say that out loud, how do you think that makes your children feel? I love your abuser. Meanwhile, Sherry has taken a completely different path. She has been actively speaking out against family vlogging and child exploitation online. She has become a strong voice in the movement advocating for the protection of children's privacy. And I think she is incredible for that. My mother-in-law and I recently had a conversation about family vlogging, and we both agreed, if you start a channel where your non-consenting children are at the forefront, turning a profit off their most private moments, nothing good can come from it. A long time ago, a woman once told me, not all money is green. And that is something I will never forget. So what are your thoughts on family vloggers, Ruby Franke, or anything else we've discussed today on Bacon Bears? And that's my opinion. If you liked what you saw here today, don't forget to like and subscribe and check out some of our other videos so we can keep the conversation going. I'll see you next time.